Another modern mystic response video. So, 104. Yeah, I don't know if he's going to do 4 videos, but we'll see. I'm 20 minutes into a 20. No, I did almost finish the video, but I'm going to play it from this point to 20 minutes or so in. Because it's just, he just totally gets snarky and stupid. So it's just, if you can't even play along for the sake of this, right when we got it right in front of us and we're saying, look, we have this problem communicating, maybe we should try a little harder, and he doesn't try at all. It's just, fuck. Anyway, so he had little minor complaints about things. He's basically arguing that reserves are totally unnecessary, and Canada doesn't even bother with it. And I'm like, well, okay, you can say that Canadian banks don't have any cash in their bank. I don't believe that. But yeah, I think having reserves is probably a good idea. If you're going to have fractional reserve banking, yes, it does seem like there should be some fraction that you keep as reserves. Yes, it seems sensible. Alright, doesn't understand the cleaning thing, and the average dollar bill has a lifespan of 18 months. Okay, they're taken out of circulation all the time, especially now that they have all this counterfeit crap. They're recycling bills all the time. So the money comes, the cash that comes into the banks, goes to the Fed, and that's when the Fed puts it in a reserve account. So cash goes into the reserve digits. Cash goes out. That's how you make a reserve digit, is cash goes in a way. Cash. I mean, I don't. He doesn't present me any counter argument, so he just says poo-poo. I don't know what that means. The St. Louis Fed used to have a whole description of the cleaning thing on their website. I couldn't find it anymore. That was like, 12 months ago when I looked again. But yeah, it was all there. They detailed it. It just goes on. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. His real argument is he doesn't have any respect for cash. He says cash is only 3%. It's only 3%. Cash is durable money. Every other form, all the rest of this stuff is not durable. Okay, I mean, a U.S. bond is pretty durable. I mean, it pretty much says how much cash you get for it. And it's a pretty authoritative statement. But cash is essentially the standard. Cash is the contract currency, and it's been protected from destruction by this whole idea of not printing it, carefully leaking it into the economy. It create just enough inflation to make it so people don't want to hold on to it, but you certainly wouldn't want a scenario where it was deflationary and people hoarded cash. So you create just enough inflation to keep the cash mobile in people's hands. They don't want to hoard cash. And they've done that, and there's only $1 trillion in circulation, a minor amount, as you point out, only 3%. But don't you see the point? The point of it being only 3% is that it's good stuff. Jeez. And the point is all the other paper is convertible to cash. That's the standard which it's denominated in. All the other stocks and bonds, everything, it's all denominated in cash. This is not an insignificant fact. And for you to sit there and play this game like the bank digits or the stock certificate is somehow worth more than cash, I think is silly. And you certainly haven't provided any reason for me to change my opinion that cash is the deal. As long as you don't destroy it, it's the deal. It's the gold. Alright, so more cash stuff. Cash. And so this is basically an argument about the value of cash. He keeps talking about for the Fed. Like, hey, $1 for you, $1 for him, and $1 for the Fed. Like, everybody, this is somehow what the accounting is. And it's nonsense. The Fed doesn't get any money. There's nothing on its books when it comes to transactions. The bank transactions are the digits are calculated by the Fed of all the transactions, and then cash is moved between the banks. Federal Reserve promises are moved between the banks. They don't move digits, they move reserve notes to the banks. So they just calculate with the digits, and then they convert it into cash when the Fed makes the balance transfers. So when the bank writes a check on its name, okay, that money's going to come back in a sense, and it's a claim on the bank's cash. It's a claim on stuff the bank has. Checks, bonds, stock, they're all claims on cash. So when you make a digit, if I was a bank and I make a digit and I send the digit out into the world, the realization is that digit's going to come back to me, and I'm going to have to produce cash. That's why the digit's important. The digit wouldn't be important if the digit didn't have to produce cash. It has to produce something of real value for that digit to mean anything. The only way the digit means anything is the cash has to mean something. Shit. Alright, there's no point in beating that one to death, but he beat it to death, you know, in this mocking tone. Alright, and the fact that reserves were always made of cash is really important. So him diminishing the meaning of cash and the way cash goes into the Federal Reserve through this cleaning process, he's saying it doesn't mean anything because it's an insignificant amount of money. $4 trillion is certainly not an insignificant amount of money, and the mechanism is important to understand because obviously the mechanism is no longer the same mechanism. So as I pointed out, or was starting to point out, so that one part of the video where I just sort of said, let's not even get into this. But, I mean, the Federal Reserve controls the currency. It controls how much currency is in circulation, and it did through reserve requirements. As it increases reserve requirements, cash comes out of circulations because the banks have to put more of their cash in the reserve accounts. Cash is disabled from the economy and stuck in reserve digits. So when reserves go up, that means cash came out of the economy. And when reserves went down, that meant cash went into the economy. That's why they called it quantitative easing. So cash was fundamental. Controlling how much currency was in the economy was fundamental to stimulating the economy and slowing the economy down, all that kind of crap. So, and that's the mechanism they used. By his theory, he's explicitly going to say in this portion of the video that these are regular reserve digits. If they were regular reserve digits, that would mean that the Federal Reserve had required the banks to deposit with them $4 trillion in cash. Now remember, there's only $1 trillion in circulation. So somehow the banks made $3 trillion more dollars, and somehow all the money you have in cash is invisible money or something. It doesn't make any sense. These are obviously not normal reserve digits. If they were normal reserve digits, there would be no cash in circulation because all the money would be in the reserve accounts. The reserve accounts are fundamental to the amount of cash in circulation. So if you have $4 trillion in the reserve accounts, there's no way those could be regular reserve digits that were made by cash. They were obviously made by the Fed. Oh, fuck. They're not cash deposits. They're Fed digits. So traditionally cash always had to go in and cash went out. There was no Fed making digits. They destroyed cash, and it would go in the reserve account. And then when they had a request for the cash to come out, they gave them new money. New printed money. Okay, but it was replacing old destroyed money. I mean, this is... Anyway,
the more important things.
How much cash goes in and out of the Fed? In the sense that from the external world. The Fed obviously feeds it with, digits, but they're converted into cash. The only way they become meaningful digits is when they're converted into cash.
Bank reserves in the real world to real financiers are screamingly important. In the hierarchy of money, there is no more important type of digit.
Yeah, see, that's where the nonsense comes in, right? Because the old reserve numbers were $30 billion. There was only $30 billion in reserve accounts, so obviously it was kind of an insignificant amount of money when you think of the whole economy. It wasn't even 3% or 1%, it was 0.000 some percent. So what sense can you make out of that? They were only important digits because interest rates were based on the transfer rates and the value, the monetizability. No, it's sort of based on how valuable money was as an investment instrument. So the more value there is out there to take advantage of, the more interest there is to get. Like the higher you can make rents, and the higher the rate of inflation are tied to each other. So interest rates are tied to inflation in the sense that if there's good opportunity to increase interest rates, then there's likelihood that you're going to increase inflation. And so that's why there would be a connection between how much use you had for cash. And that's sort of what reserves would have something to do with, is how useful money was, because there were so many investment opportunities. At some points the economy has very few investment opportunities. Markets aren't doing anything, they're just going, little flatlining thing.
Than the Federal Reserve digit. It is numero uno.
Okay, so he's saying the Federal Reserve digit is better than cash. And I'm just saying it's the same thing as cash. It only comes out of the Federal Reserve as cash. It's cash. A Federal Reserve digit is a promise of cash. Now, for the first time, unprecedented in the history of the Federal Reserve, there is $4 trillion in the reserve accounts, right? So up to 2009, the number probably never went over $100 billion in reserve accounts. And for the first time in history, now we got $4 trillion in there. And he's going to say it's all the same doing business. That's obviously not the same doing business.
So what has happened with QE, and I want to point out quantitative easing, is that this is basically just embezzlement. Okay, the racket that the government has.
You see, you should notice by this that, alright, America is a very bizarre place, run by big money, buying politicians at $1 a vote, or whatever, whichever way you want to express it. It's shocking. But if it's embezzlement that you're about to describe, don't you think somebody in the last 6 years might have just spotted it?
Okay, who in the last 6 years was pointing out that reserves have nothing to do with whether banks can create loans? Who was pointing that out? In the last 6 years, how many human beings on planet Earth was pointing out that there's absolutely no connection between the reserve accounts and loans? Who is pointing that out? Oh, that's right, nobody. Absolutely nobody was pointing that out. So, again, you can't have it both ways. You cite some... You sit there dumbstruck by the fact that none of the economists can get it right, can get something so obvious right. They keep claiming that, yeah, those banks got to lend more money because look at those excessive reserves. When the excessive reserves have absolutely nothing to do with the fact that the banks haven't been lending. The numbers aren't anywhere close to comparable. If the banks stopped lending for 5 years, they wouldn't come up with $4 trillion. Shit.
And it's only you that spotted it? Doesn't that give you a hint that maybe you might not be barking quite up the right tree?
Well, whatever. This is not a counter-argument, I'm sorry. So you really haven't explained how the money got into the Federal Reserve. So he's going to make claims, like I said. I mean, I know how it got in there. The Fed made the digits, and the digits were made for the purpose of banks making digits. So they're just there to back up the request to the banks, okay, different banks, to buy crap for the Fed. That's what happened. I mean, you know, maybe I'll show this chart. I mean, he knows this chart, so I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. But here's the Federal Reserve chart. This is what they've bought, okay? So now they've got $2 trillion in mortgage-backed securities, in the treasury bonds. So they got $2 trillion in their own bonds that they bought. You know, their old bonds, and they just bought them off the market, our old debt. And they got $1.3 trillion worth of securities. So if you add those two numbers up, you get 3.7, and obviously it's now 2014, so it's now $4 trillion. So there's your $4 trillion right there. That's what it bought. It bought securities, treasury securities, and mortgage-backed securities. It's right there in blue and red. There's no argument. You can't argue. They didn't buy this shit. So why are you arguing they didn't buy the shit? They bought the shit.
I mean, I'm just trying to be logic here.
No, you're not.
Logic, Al.
No, you're not.
Resorted to here to inflate the stock market. So that's what this is all about, is the stock market. So the stock market crashed in 2008. Banks were bankrupt because they held a bunch of equities that weren't worth anything.
The stock market went to its lowest in, I think it was March 2009.
Yeah, so what? What does that have to do with it? We know it was 2008 is where it started falling. So, you know, when you want to say when the bottom was, okay, whatever. Nitpicky much.
And it was vaguely important for the banks because
Vaguely important.
it had knock-on effects. But let's call them collateralized loan obligations that they had in their SIVs, their shadow bank.
Yeah, right. They had a whole bunch of the stupid mortgage-backed securities that we've now bought. The federal government's now bought. They had a whole bunch of those, and they weren't worth anything. And they knew they weren't worth anything. They were junk. And now we've FDIC'd a big pile of that junk for them. So now the junk is FDIC'd insured. Now, for the first time in American history, another thing that's the first time, we're FDIC insured stocks. That's right, because they couldn't sell them unless the government guaranteed them. But they didn't want they didn't want them to go bad because that would mean bankruptcy for people. So this is the stop the rich man from going bankrupt policy. That's all this is.
Vehicles were much more important to them. In fact, the equivalent of 97 to 3 than...
Okay, whatever you want to... You want to say it's all about derivatives and all this other stuff? I'm not going to argue that it isn't. I'm just saying all that stuff is based on the fact that the market was lower and that all of these people were way over leveraged, and there was, you know, if they had to resolve their accounts at that low market, okay, they were going to take a huge haircut. They were going to get slaughtered. And so their only hope was to resolve their accounts with a market higher.
Equities they're not particularly bothered about at the time. They had much bigger fish to bother about.
Yeah, well, whether you say it's the equities or whether you say it's the derivatives of the equities or you say it's the derivatives of the mortgage-backed securities, I mean, what's the difference? The point is that the paper had lost value. Okay, the stock market style paper, can we call it that, had lost value.
They had to get the stock market back up, and the plan, this is one of the plans, was the Fed would put a bunch of money in the reserve accounts.
Okay, this is another one that should just jump out to you and go, what the hell am I talking about? Surely I'm just making this up.
Yeah. So he's not going to make a counter argument. So again, he's just mocking as if he had some counter argument, and he has no counter argument here.
The Fed would just put money into the reserve accounts of the banks.
Yes, that's what they did. With the intent, okay, clearly, that the banks would create banker digits, give them to holders of securities, okay, to purchase the security from the holder of the security and transfer the security to whatever the secure location is that securities go to. The account now has a security in it, in the Fed's name. okay, at the Fed's request, without actual cash transfer, without the federal government actually buying it. They didn't just go to the store and buy the bubble gum, honestly. They went to a middleman and say, look, middleman, buy me the bubble gum and I promise to pay you sometime in the future, and here's an account with the money in it over here in this bank. Okay, so you can see the money any day you want to, you just can't collect it right now, okay? But you'll get it in the future, I promise, and I'll pay you interest just to prove I promise. Yeah, that's what happened here. And you're not making a counter argument. You're just being obnoxious and rude.
Right. In the States, how many banks are there? About 6,000.
How many banks buy securities for the federal government? About 6.
5 or 6 big ones. 5 big ones now, I suppose. How would the Fed decide how many?
Again, let's look at the chart. All of this stuff, $4 trillion worth of it, all of this stuff was on the open market. And it was bought off of the open market at the Fed's demand or request, okay? And it's just a fact, okay? That's what happened. It's not a fantasy, it's a fact.
Any reserves to put in which bank and why?
Yeah, I'm sure the $4 trillion is not everybody's money. It's the banks that have made the purchases. So the banks that created the digits, okay, their bank check went out. So they gave a guy a bank check. Let's say that for $1 billion. We're just talking about one security being bought. So the guy has the security. They decide to buy the security. The bank writes a check, gives it to the guy, through his bank, and that check will come back to that bank eventually. Okay, so and all they have is that this idea that, well, look, if we become cash strapped, somebody's going to have to give us the cash because, yeah, we don't have cash for these digits we made. So if somebody shows up with that $1 billion check someday, and we don't have the cash because this is a lot of cash you told us to make, this is a lot of digits you told us to make, then they're going to have to go to that reserve account and get the cash. But that's all that's happened here.
Would this not just set alarm bells ringing in your head and go, I don't know really?
Well, wouldn't all this nonsense have an alarm bell go off in your head that this is not an argument, okay? This silly alarm bell thing isn't an argument. You're not telling me, here's the blueprint of how the money got into the reserve accounts. All right, so why don't you ask Mariana? I say, generally speaking, Mariana's an honest person, maybe. And I say, you go ask her if she thinks the money in those reserve accounts was cash the banks put into the reserve accounts. And I'm telling you, she's going to tell you, no, the banks never put any cash in those reserve accounts. That is not the bank's cash. They just made the digits. They haven't collected the money. That's why the federal government's paying interest.
And the fact that it's completely stupid, does that not send it a lot?
Yeah, whatever. It's completely stupid to understand that $4 trillion is not normal reserve account financing, and that if I am correct, that manipulating reserve accounts was the way the Fed controlled how much currency was in circulation, that clearly if you have $5 trillion in cash in the reserve account, there's no fucking way there's any money in the economy. Cash money.
Alarm bells ringing in your head that somebody might notice this, that the Fed just gives the banks...
Look, nobody's paid any attention to any of this stuff, right? I mean, why should we be the ones to have to figure this shit out, right? When all these economists somehow couldn't figure out that, again, that banks don't need the reserve money. They don't need cash to make a loan. They can write a loan. They don't need the cash. They can just make the digits. The point is that eventually the digits are a claim on cash, so they're going to have claim cash if the claims come in. So if more claims come in for cash than they're getting in deposit cash, then they're going to have a shortfall, and then it's going to be a problem. And that's called a run on the bank, and that's called a depression, and that's called a problem where you have oversold your digits, and now you have all your money tied up in loans, and you have no money available to pay off your depositors.
Reserve digits. What sets alarm bells off in your head? Logic, I thought.
Again, what is the point of this? It's not I'm sorry. It's not logical for me to say some guy is saying I'm stupid. Oh, I guess I should change my mind because he says I'm stupid. Sorry, that wouldn't be logical, stupid.
This is not logical.
Yeah, it's not logical for you to think the banks put $4 trillion of their cash in the reserve accounts. That's not logical.
And have the banks, instead of cashing the money out, just make digits and buy stock. So they bought $4 trillion. They bought $4 trillion worth of stuff off the stock market, and that's sitting somewhere in limbo land here in the bank vault or in the Fed's vault, whoever's vault it's in. It's in somebody's vault.
Does that not again set alarm bells ringing in your own head? $4 trillion of stock that's been bought, and what's sitting in a limbo? I suppose you think you still get stock certificates.
Yeah, you still get receipts. Yeah, you really do. Yeah, you get solid paper if you want it. If you want the deal, you get the deal. Yeah. I know. Yeah, you can buy the actual stock certificate, or you can trust your bank. But either way, the certificate's in a vault somewhere. I mean, it seems a little bit sensible sometimes that certificates might be migrated into vaults for security reasons. But yeah, you can shove them in a safe deposit box. You can get actual paper certificates and shove them in a safe deposit box. You can do that. And they're good stock.
Stock certificates are sitting in somebody's vault.
Yes, they're all sitting somewhere. Okay, with whose vault they're in, who cares? But yeah, they're in a vault somewhere.
Does none of this set alarm bell ringing in your head that it just sounds like something that you might have just made up?
It's all got serial numbers, it's all itemized. You couldn't sell stock if you didn't have some way to secure how much stock exists, is there? No, so obviously you have to create some kind of paper trail, some sort of actual documentation that says, okay, there's a $1 trillion stock bond certificate, there's a $500,000 stock certificate, there's all kinds of different denominations. It's like money, and yeah, you have to serial number it, and you have to give it reality, so there isn't counterfeiting and all that other kind of crap. So it's just silly to sit there and say there isn't any. Of course there is some, but we generally speaking trust the bank to do our commodity. When I buy a bunch of corn or something, a corn future, I'm trusting an awful lot of people. In the sense, I don't actually get the corn and shove it in my pocket.
Because it doesn't actually make sense when you listen to it.
Yeah, says you. Again, so I'm just saying, we know they bought this stuff. I was just saying it doesn't matter where the receipt is. Okay, we're talking about the receipt for $4 trillion worth of securities. And all I was saying is, who cares where the receipt is? Who cares whose name is on the receipt? The point is we know why the stuff was bought, and it was bought at the direction of the Fed.
It was basically paid for just by reserve digits guaranteeing the creation of banker digits. Now the banks didn't have to, it doesn't cost the bank anything at all to hit a button on their computer and make $1 billion or $1 trillion.
True, but it's got to be accounted for because banks are accountants. And
yeah, I know, but they're not accounting for this $4 trillion. You're still pretending like this is somehow... Again, this is more money than the three biggest banks have in total asset equity of their own. It's a ton of fucking money. Alright? And there's no way they could do legitimate banking if they had been saddled with a $1 trillion loan. Let's say there's 6 banks that did the purchasing. Each one would be liable for $700 billion. You think they could do $700 billion worth of loans in 2 years and not have a huge liability problem, which means they're going to have a huge, reserve problem?
Fed are accountants, and it's all got to be accounted for because they're accountants.
And again, I'm not arguing that it's not accounted for, so that's not the argument here. The argument is how did the money get into the Federal Reserve reserve accounts? How did that money get in there? And it wasn't gotten in there by cash going into the reserve accounts. It got in there because the Federal Reserve created the damn money, and it's just never printed it. It's like printing money, except they didn't print it. They're promising that we'll print it later if we have to, but for now everything's okay because I'm paying you a little bit of interest, even though there's no liability to the banks, as I said, which means the banks are just making out like, wow, free lunch or what? I mean, I'm guaranteed the money, I have no liability, and if I'm cash strapped, the Fed will help me out. So I'm guaranteed to win.
Accountants are like that.
It's only a problem if it's a liability. Clearly, when the Fed did this, it didn't count it on the bank's flow chart. Okay, so the banks aren't, it isn't technically a real loan. It isn't technically a real deposit. It's technically nothing. So it's just completely embezzled money. It's
More alarm bells not ringing? They really should be, because surely listening back to this, you can hear that it's nonsense.
Well, again, the nonsense, the average economics commentator. I could watch CNN, I could watch all the Financial Times, I could watch Bloomberg, and they're all going to sit there and still talk about, oh, their banks aren't lending money, look at all that reserve money, blah, blah, blah. They'll be talking all that shit, even though it doesn't mean shit. So don't tell me, don't make this silly argument that, oh, I am automatically wrong because they aren't seeing this. Well, people don't see a lot of shit. It ain't my problem. I'm making an argument. In my opinion, you're not making an argument. You're just making the argument from, everybody else disagrees with you, Gary, so I guess you're wrong. Okay, super. But yeah, that doesn't do the alarm bell thing for me. It just really doesn't. I mean, if somebody told me that, like, penises are an expression of some demonic Jew god with horns and stuff and blah blah blah, or some kind of, and they're all going to blow up in 3 years, I'm not, I don't, why did I use this as an example? Yeah, I don't have any obligation to invest in that. And if you're going to tell me that the reserve money came from cash being put into the reserve accounts, that the banks extracted cash from the economy and put it in the reserve accounts, well, that didn't fucking happen.
And you go, oh, prove it, prove it. It's like the existence of God. I don't have to prove these.
Yeah, well, again, I'll just go back to the Federal Reserve chart. There's your proof. They spent the money. No doubt about that. And we know that those Federal Reserve digits are the guarantee for that spent money. And the only thing the Federal Reserve has done is basically, it's a way of printing cash without printing cash, right? Everybody always talks about printing cash because, yeah, that causes inflation. This is another one of these synthetic ways where you almost print cash, but you don't quite print cash, right? Because all you did was print banker digits. And so, again, as long as you sell the equities at the same price you paid for them, you got away with it. But I think we know that's not going to happen.
Things. Your logic should listen to this and go, oh well, yeah, perhaps you're right, Nick.
Yeah, right. You're right because you say everybody else disagrees with you. Okay, that's a really great argument. Not.
Shouldn't it really?
No,
how
it shouldn't
stupid
really.
does this sound?
How stupid does it sound for you to sit there and make the argument from popularity? Should I believe in God? Should I believe in whatever, quantum two-slit wave interference bullshit? No, I shouldn't.
Made up to buy equities. The banks don't pay anything for it. It doesn't cost them anything. It doesn't, it's just absolutely meaningless as a sacrifice for them.
And to understand, it's meaningless as a sacrifice for them as long as they're not required to have reserves to back up that huge loan they've given the federal government. And quite obviously the federal government's saying, no, you don't need to have reserves to cover this huge amount of money that's going to come into the banking system through these purchases. So, yeah, the liabilities exist, and as long as you have enough liquidity to handle your daily business, we'll give you a little bit of an interest thing. And yeah, just don't come to us for the cash, please, because we're not going to give it to you. Because if we give you the cash, we'll be increasing the amount of cash in circulation, and we'll be creating hard inflation, not soft inflation.
So it's like somebody coming up to you and saying they're going to pay you rent even though you don't own the house. Okay, so it's like just free. And so to boot, to make this even more insidious, a nonsense, is the Fed made a deal with the banks to pay them interest on these fake digits. So this fake reserve.
They do pay interest on the excess reserves. Something that's right.
Yeah, they pay interest on the excess reserves, and again, but the part we disagree on is the fact that not for any good reason. They're not paying interest because the banks have a real liability or a real risk. They have no real risk. They put up no money of their own, really. This is completely a fake loan. The loan has been guaranteed by again, we just use them as middlemen to make a purchase for us that we plan to pay for later. And again, pay for later means we plan to somehow dispose of the equities and get our money back, to get the cash back.
And there's no particular way that they're fake digits.
Well, they are, in a very particular way, in the sense that cash didn't create them. And the Federal Reserve accounts always had cash-created digits, not non-cash created digits. They're non-cash created digits. They do not represent cash, they represent creation. Promise of future cash.
Just normal excess reserves.
There you go. Normal. Did you hear that? Normal excess of reserves. So for the first time in history, reserve accounts go from $30 billion to $4 trillion, and he's calling it normal. Uh-huh. And bells didn't go off in your head when you said that? Never in the history of mankind has there ever been $4 trillion in reserve accounts, or even $1 trillion, or even $500 billion, or even $200 billion, and yet no alarm bells are going off in your head when you're saying this is normal? Uh-huh.
Related in the rules and accounting regulations of the banking system and central banking system.
No, it has nothing to do with that. This has to do with quantitative easing 2, okay? The new version of it, which is, buy equities without real cash.
Money that the banks really don't own. They can't take it out as cash because that would end up putting $4 trillion of cash into the economy.
And this cash thing again. Banks, as I say, hate the stuff.
It doesn't matter. They don't hate this stuff. You're supposed to hate this stuff. Again, cash would not work as transaction currency if it was hoardable. The whole point is cash shouldn't be making you money. The whole point of it is that, but it is the standard. It is the thing, okay? It's the thing you pay your taxes in. It's the thing all the other things are denominated in, okay? Cash isn't denominated in Google stock. Google stock is denominated into cash. Damn it.
And what do you think a bank could do with $500 billion? 100 billion in cash?
It could go to a bank and buy bonds, couldn't it? Yes, it could. It could go to the stock market and buy Walmart. It could do lots of things with cash. cash works.
What would they do with it? Who would they give it to? This is the thing. Well, what use would it be for them?
They can put it in their PayPal account. God damn. Not complicated.
They just loan it out. Banks do not lend out huge wadges of cash when they...
Yeah, and I never said they do lend out huge wadges of cash. The point of the cash thing is they have to pay the depositors in cash, or things as good as cash. That's what happens when it goes back to the Federal Reserve, you dolt. Okay, when the digits go to the Federal Reserve to be evened out, it's cash, okay, that goes to one bank, and cash taken from the other bank in terms of their reserve cash. Okay? That's when the real hard transaction, the finish transaction, the last transaction is in fucking cash.
Make loans. They're not gangsters. They're not drug dealers. When they make a loan, they scratch in liability 1 million, asset 1 million for us, the bank. They don't need the...
Well, actually, they don't get the luxury of that necessarily, okay? We know that when they make a loan that they might not get the deposit back themselves, so there is a little bit of trickiness to this whole thing.
Cash. They wouldn't want the cash.
Well, again, you want cash if you want something else, okay? Cash is transaction currency. I mean, that's how I've said it 10 million times, okay? That's what it is. It's a transaction contract. It's a guaranteed transaction contract. A guaranteed contract for, disposing of monetizing. To make it possible for me to trade sheeps and horses, or bananas and apples, or apples and oranges. I can make transactions between apples and oranges because I can just denominate it into this guaranteed contract cash and then just do the final transfer in cash. Because I don't have to worry about how many apples equal how many oranges then.
And there's only $1 trillion in the entire world. There's only $1 trillion American dollars loose. And if the banks actually pulled this money out of the reserve accounts, there'd be 4 more trillion loose.
I agree. The banks technically can pull 4 trillion, let's say, $4 trillion of cash out of the Fed. They'd have to wait a while the Fed printed it up. But what in the name of...
Yeah, so he's going to say again, what would they do with it? I mean, you really can't figure out how you go to a bank and deposit cash and get value in the terms of you could buy anything with the banker digits that you could buy with the cash, and that banks can't just go to another bank and say, here's some cash, give me some stock. I can trade cash for any kind of paper on earth. I can trade cash for oil. I can trade cash for food. I can trade cash for prostitutes. I can trade cash for anything on this planet. So it's just stupid to say, what would they do with cash? Cash is the best money to have. As long as you're not hoarding it or holding it. It's not the best money to hold, but it's the best money to have if you want to do a transaction. It's a lot better than a Bitcoin or some bank note, some check from a bank. How long would you like to hold a check from a bank on the shelf in your house? Let's say I had a bank check for $10,000. You think I'm going to just let it sit on the shelf? You think I'm going to feel good about that bank check sitting on the shelf over there? No, I'm going to be like, fuck that piece of shit. Alright? I want something real. I mean, you know, I don't want a check. Anyway. So to sit there and argue, what are they going to do with $4 trillion in cash? I mean, this is the silliest thing you've said. I don't know. What am I... no bells went off for you. I don't know what I could do with $4 trillion in cash. I don't know what I could not do with $4 trillion in cash. I think I would be there's nothing, you can't even describe how powerful that would make you. It would make you bigger than the sun. $4 trillion in cash. I mean, fuck. Anyway, so till the next installment, I suppose. But yeah, no, it's just not going very well. Not going very well at all. These papers keep just breaking out of this notebook for some reason. Interesting. To me, anyway.